Selamat pagi, Pak David. Selamat
Ah,
pagi, Bu Mudi.
berarti suara saya terdengar ya. Mudah-mudahan
Sangat
jelas.
jelas. Sangat jelas, Pak.
Selamat pagi Pak David.
Bu Elin nih dari ini nih dari kantor juga ya.
Di kantor itu Pak.
Siapa tahu WFA. Belum ya? Minggu depan ya baru WFA
Minggu
ya.
depan Pak. Ya.
Nanti narasumbernya join mendekati waktunya ya.
Begitu ya Bu Maudi ya.
Halo, selamat pagi Bu Tika, Pak David. Sebelumnya mohon maaf, saya tidak terdengar tadi Bapak Ibu. Boleh diulang lagi kah? Sepertinya
Oh ya, untuk narasumbernya mungkin sebentar lagi nanti mendekati jam 10 akan bergabung ya Bu.
ya, saya sudah brief untuk mereka 5 menit sebelum
Hmm,
acara mulai sudah tiba sih, tapi untuk cek sound dari setengah 10 ini sepertinya belum. Cuma mereka
Oke,
sudah aware urutan berbicaranya juga, dan kita mulainya akan ada sambutan juga. Mereka sudah cukup aware terkait itu.
oke.
Baik, terima kasih Bu.
Terima kasih kembali.
Am, izin tanya nih, eh, kan kita ini ada interpreter ya. Nah, cara kerja interpreternya gimana ya? Apakah misalnya tiap beberapa kan kalau ngomong terus gitu ya, lalu diterjemahin atau jeda-jeda gitu loh. Misalnya sambutan lah nanti atau paralel saja gitu.
Iya, izin menjawab Bapak. Saya Deo dari teknisi interpreter.
Ya.
Nanti Bapak atau Ibu tinggal ngomong saja dan interpreter akan secara simultan Pak. Jadi secara bersamaan akan terjemahkan apa yang sedang dibicarakan itu. Terima kasih Pak.
Oh, baik-baik. Jadi nggak perlu jeda ya. Karena saya membayangkan saya baru ada meeting dengan orang asing juga gitu ya.
Ah
Tiap
ya,
kali saya ngomong beberapa jeda dulu nunggu diterjemahin gitu. Jadi
ya,
ya agak melelahkan gitu.
ya, baik Pak. Seperti itu Pak secara teknisnya.
Oh
Terima
iya,
kasih.
jadi mungkin kalau begitu, apakah nanti di chat bisa diumumkan ke peserta ya kalau ada tool interpretation sebetulnya di sebelahnya more, itu
Iya,
jadi mereka bisa klik English and Indonesian.
iya, baik,
Ya,
baik, baik, Pak. Sudah saya siapkan untuk house rules-nya. Nanti saya akan blast di chat box.
ya, terima kasih.
Ini juga akan saya sampaikan, Bu Maudi, saat pembukaan.
Oke, baik, terima kasih.
Nah, kalau saya sendiri, saya harus pakai bahasa Indonesia atau boleh campur-campur? Gimana sebaiknya ya?
Untuk perkenalan pertama mungkin bisa bahasa Indonesia terlebih dahulu ya Pak, untuk memperkenalkan narasumbernya ke para
Oh gitu.
peserta. Tapi setelah itu saat bermoderasi dengan para narasumbernya, sebetulnya silakan campur-campur atau di Inggris juga nggak apa-apa Pak. Nanti akan disesuaikan
Hmm.
dari tim bahasa global.
Oke. Jadi saya kan kemarin tuh dikasih moderator brief nih ya, yang masih dalam bahasa Indonesia. Jadi untuk eh, opening dari moderator, lalu perkenalan narasumber tuh masih pakai bahasa Indonesia gitu ya, saran Bu Modi ya.
Iya, betul betul Pak. Karena memang di awal-awal akan dari MC dan Pak Yose juga akan berbahasa Indonesia.
Oke, 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 oke. Em, dan
Tapi nanti,
mereka otomatis sebetulnya mendapat terjemahannya ya
ya,
si
jadi mereka
narasumber ya.
betul. Jadi mereka tinggal pencet tool interpretationnya mereka di English seperti itu.
Hmm.
Kemarin juga sudah saya brief sih terkait ini.
Oke, oke, oke.
Ya,
Hmm.
Pak David, mungkin izin nambahin Pak David. Jadi
Oh ya,
nanti,
silakan Pak.
jadi nanti ketika apa Pak David apa berdiskusi dengan moderator nggak apa-apa full Inggris saja Pak gitu ya.
Hmm.
nanti pertanyaan peserta dalam bahasa Indonesia Bapak translatekan aja ke Inggris Pak David karena kan memang
Hmm.
kan si narasumbernya kan memang bisanya bahasa Inggris gitu ya. Gitu seperti itu. Jadi memang mungkin Pak David tuh menyampaikan dalam bahasa Inggris mungkin di awal gitu tapi ketika sudah ketemu moderatornya full Inggris aja nggak apa-apa Pak sampai nanti
Hmm.
selesai gitu ya. Mungkin nanti ketika mau di akhir mungkin ya baik sesi selesai gitu saya kembalikan ke MC gitu nanti MC-nya
Hmm.
balik ke Mbak Tika lagi seperti itu Pak David.
Oke, berarti kalau gitu ini nggak ada interaktif session dengan penanya ya. Jadi
Nggak ada
semua
Pak.
lewat chat, lalu
Iya.
kita bacakan gitu ya.
Iya, betul Pak David. Jadi,
Oh, baik.
kenapa kami tidak ada interaction session? Karena kadang-kadang peserta itu nanya terlalu panjang, Pak. Jadi,
Hmm.
jadi kebanyakan ada introduction-nya. Jadi memang nanti Pak David mungkin dibantu Bu Modi gitu nanti kan untuk memilih pertanyaannya atau Pak David juga ada yang interest, silakan saja Pak
Hmm.
ditanyakan gitu Pak. Nanti ada fitur
Hmm.
Q&A Pak yang kita sediakan seperti itu untuk bisa nanti
Oke.
ketika dia menjelaskan kan Bapak juga bisa mengkurasi nih sambil mengkurasi mana yang pertanyaan
Hmm.
belum dijelaskan seperti itu Pak.
Oke, oke, oke. Clear, clear. Dan saya nggak tahu ya apakah ini pemahaman saya. eh, Sebaiknya saya tidak mensummarize, tapi mungkin saya akan mengundang mereka kasih takeaways-nya, key takeaways-nya mungkin dalam 2 menit terakhir gitu. Karena kalau saya yang summarize bisa beda kan gitu ya
Baik.
interpretasi saya
Ya,
gitu.
ya. Boleh nggak apa-apa Pak David,
Nggak
polanya
apa
gitu,
ya?
bagus nggak apa-apa. Masalah itu Pak.
Iya, iya, iya. Ini trik juga sih biar nggak terlalu banyak mikir.
Itu strategi moderator Pak, betul tuh Pak.
Oke, oke.
Di kantor Pak David, lagi di kantor.
Lagi di ruangan nih. Tadi diskusi
Oh,
rapat harmonisasi RPP. Tapi Pak izin Pak ada penugasan moderator.
iya. Ya, makasih nih Pak David sudah dibantu nih kami PPSDM bersama RSD Pak David.
Siap,
Dulu
siap.
kan Pak David pernah jadi narasumber ya dulu Bu Elin ya di webinar ini ya zaman Pak Laude
Ya,
kalau
pernah, pernah. Di awal-awal ya, pas
dulu ya.
COVID ya, Pak.
Iya, iya.
Dulu sama Andrew Blakers dulu.
Ya, dari Australia. Ya, betul.
Ya, ayo kita bikin lagi, nggak apa-apa. Update.
Siap, Pak.
Boleh Pak David, itu pembimbingnya Pak David sebelumnya ya? Apa?
Iya, itu
Oh,
supervisor saya. Jadi nasib
didukung
nasib
apa
saya
ya?
di tangan beliau gitu.
Ya,
Untungnya saya udah lulus.
iya, 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 alhamdulillah udah lulus nih, nah, lancar lah.
Tapi aku lihat si Samantha Christie ini sebetulnya dia kayak cerita RUKN-nya mereka sih kalau saya lihat slide-nya yang dia sebut ISP itu ya. Saya kalau melihatnya gini, kan sebetulnya goal kita itu untuk capacity building ya. Nah, mungkin kalau kalau ini ya kalau sekedar saran sih barangkali ada sesi-sesi lanjutan. Kalau bisa ngundang instalatirnya. Jadi praktisi di Australinya share bahwa saya tiap hari loh nginstal 1 megawatt gitu. Cerita itu yang menurut saya akan wow kan gitu ya. Gimana caranya? Saya punya orang sekian, disertifikasi kemampuan apa saja gitu. Jadi langsung apa ya? Prakteknya gitu loh yang diceritain gitu. Menurut saya itu lebih lebih membumi ya diskusinya gitu. Ini kalau mohon maaf ya ini kan kalau yang kita diskusi hari ini baru planning kan sebetulnya. Planning dan historical experience aja sebetulnya. Tidak tidak menyentuh kalau misalnya anak-anak SMK nonton webinar ini kira-kira gitu loh Mas ya. Kan harapannya instalator itu nggak perlu sarjana lah. SMK, STM kan gitu ya. Tapi dia harus ngapain kan gitu ya. Harus dibekalin apa? Syukur-syukur nanti dari Australia kita siap ngasih training gratis, diongkosi pula kan. Seneng kita.
Batin tuh Pak David. Tapi kalau
Iya.
ada linknya Pak David yang bisa kami kontak boleh ya Bu Elin ya, bisa
Bisa.
boleh nanti.
Kapan hari saya kan ngundang dari PLN, ngundang dari
Oh,
SDM tuh 2024 Agustus
hmm,
sama bulan berapa saya lupa bulannya. Ada 3 delegasi lah itu.
hmm.
Dibayarin kok sama Australinya, dibayarin ongkosnya macam-macam. Waktu itu konteksnya untuk pump storage, ngelihat pump storage, ngelihat bagaimana PLTS skala besar di Australia, termasuk baterainya gitu. Nah, waktu itu kami ngundang juga instalatirnya. Cuman pada waktu itu kayaknya kondisinya kurang tiba-tiba nggak bisa hadir gitu, udah H-1 ngabarin gitu. Tetapi prinsipnya mereka sangat senang gitu untuk sharing gitu. Dan teman-teman kita kan banyak di Australia, di Sydney juga, yang lagi PhD, yang dia juga tadinya di kita ini kayak instalatir juga, pemilik apa ya, jasa konstruksi PLTS lah gitu. Nah, sekarang dia lagi PhD. Tentu senang hati kalau kita ajak cerita lebih kontekstual lagi gitu kan. Karena dia orang Indonesia, lagi berada di Australia dan bisa bawa pengalaman keduanya. Gitu.
Pak David, nanti kita jajaki ya Pak.
Mm-mm. Ya nantilah setelah ini kita ngomong, ini
Setelah ini
cuman
kita jangan.
mumpung ingat aja gitu, biar
Ya,
nggak lupa.
baik. Mungkin Pak David ya bisa kita putarkan video. Jadi peserta sudah bergabung nih Pak David,
Sip.
sekitar 120.
Great,
Baik,
great.
kita tunggu sampai jam 10 ya. Pak, ya silakan.
Indonesia is racing towards a brighter future, a future powered by renewable energy. But to reach our targets, we need more than just technology. We need the hands and minds to build it. Every transformation needs champions. The Renewable Energy Skills Development Project, RESD, is a development cooperation between the Indonesian government through the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources and the Swiss government through the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, or SECO. This project also collaborates closely with the Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Technology and the Ministry of Manpower. In this cooperation, we are building the most important capital that will power Indonesia's net zero journey to 2060, the people. In the first phase, we've reached new heights in building the foundation of a renewable energy skills ecosystem. 214 teachers have been trained in collaboration with Switzerland's finest institutions, bringing world-class expertise to Indonesian classrooms. While updated renewable energy curricula is co-developed with industry partners to ensure graduates possess relevant, job-ready skills. 835 competent and qualified engineers and technicians have graduated, ready to plan, install, operate, and maintain solar PV and micro hydropower plants across Indonesia. Spanning the archipelago, RESD-supported education and training centers are already active in 9 provinces. Swiss Universities of Applied Sciences and Swiss Federal University for Vocational Education and Training, as well as industry experts, joined hands with polytechnics and vocational training institutions, transforming lives one student at a time. We are also addressing inclusivity barriers by creating greater awareness of the role of men and women in energy and encouraging women to take on greater roles in the renewable energy industry. Over 100 partnerships with renewable energy companies have been forged, creating pathways from classroom to career, from theory to impact. RenewableEnergy.id, a learning and career platform, delivers up-to-date insights, career opportunities, and promotes gender awareness in the renewable energy sector, connecting audiences across Indonesia and beyond. Following our milestones in Phase 1, October 2025 marks our exciting new chapter. In Phase 2, the project expands its partnerships to a total of 19 polytechnics and vocational training institutions in 14 provinces across Indonesia, focusing on not only solar energy and hydropower, but also battery storage. RESD is expanding its public outreach, delivering hands-on trainings directly to communities, further strengthen collaboration with renewable energy companies, and empowering more women to lead in renewable energy. Because when innovation meets inclusion, everyone thrives. More than a project, RESD is a catalyst because every teacher trained multiplies knowledge. Every graduate becomes an agent for change. Every partnership brings Indonesia further in its journey towards net zero emission. Through the collaboration between government institutions, education and training centers, and industry partners, we are contributing to a brighter future of Indonesia, powered by renewable energy. Indonesia is racing towards a brighter future, a future powered by renewable energy. But to reach our targets, we need more than just technology. We need the hands and minds to build it. Every transformation needs champions. The Renewable Energy Skills Development Project, RESD, is a development cooperation between the Indonesian government through the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources and the Swiss government through the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, or SECO. This project also collaborates closely with the Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Technology and the Ministry of Manpower. In this cooperation, we are building the most important capital that will power Indonesia's net zero journey to 2060, the people. In the first phase, we've reached new heights in building the foundation of a renewable energy skills ecosystem. 214 teachers have been trained in collaboration with Switzerland's finest institutions, bringing world-class expertise to Indonesian classrooms. While updated renewable energy curricula is co-developed with industry partners to ensure graduates possess relevant, job-ready skills. 835 competent and qualified engineers and technicians have graduated, ready to plan, install, operate, and maintain solar PV and micro hydropower plants across Indonesia. Spanning the archipelago, RESD-supported education and training centers are already active in 9 provinces. Swiss Universities of Applied Sciences and Swiss Federal University We are also addressing inclusivity barriers by creating greater awareness of the role of men and women in energy and encouraging women to take on greater roles in the renewable energy industry. Over 100 partnerships with renewable energy companies have been forged, creating pathways from classroom to career, from theory to impact. RenewableEnergy.id, a learning and career platform, delivers up-to-date insights, career opportunities, and promotes gender awareness in the renewable energy sector, connecting audiences across Indonesia and beyond. Following our milestones in Phase 1, October 2025 marks our exciting new chapter. In Phase 2, the project expands its partnerships to a total of 19 polytechnics and vocational training institutions in 14 provinces across Indonesia, focusing on not only solar energy and hydropower, but also battery storage. RESD is expanding its public outreach, delivering hands-on trainings directly to communities, further strengthen collaboration with renewable energy companies, and empowering more women to lead in renewable energy. Because when innovation meets inclusion, everyone thrives. More than a project, RESD is a catalyst. Because every teacher trained multiplies knowledge. Every graduate becomes an agent for change. Every partnership brings Indonesia further in its journey towards net zero emission. Through the collaboration between government institutions, education and training centers, and industry partners, we are contributing to a brighter future of Indonesia, powered by renewable energy. Indonesia is racing towards a brighter future, a future powered by renewable energy. But to reach our targets, we need more than just technology. We need the hands and minds to build it. Every transformation needs champions. The Renewable Energy Skills Development Project, RESD, is a development cooperation between the Indonesian government through the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources and the Swiss government through the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, or SECO. This project also collaborates closely with the Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Technology and the Ministry of Manpower. In this cooperation, we are building the most important capital that will power Indonesia's net zero journey to 2060, the people. In the first phase, we've reached new heights in building the foundation of a renewable energy skills ecosystem. 214 teachers have been trained in collaboration with Switzerland's finest institutions, bringing world-class expertise to Indonesian classrooms. While updated renewable energy curricula is co-developed with industry partners to ensure graduates possess relevant, job-ready skills. 835 competent and qualified engineers and technicians have graduated, ready to plan, install, operate, and maintain solar PV and micro hydropower plants across Indonesia. Spanning the archipelago, RESD-supported education and training centers are already active in 9 provinces. Swiss Universities of Applied Sciences and Swiss Federal University for Vocational Education and Training, as well as industry experts, joined hands with polytechnics and vocational training institutions, transforming lives one student at a time. We are also addressing inclusivity barriers by creating greater awareness of the role of men and women in energy and encouraging women to take on greater roles in the renewable energy industry. Over 100 partnerships with renewable energy companies have been forged, creating pathways from classroom to career, from theory to impact. RenewableEnergy.id, a learning and career platform, delivers up-to-date insights, career opportunities, and promotes gender awareness in the renewable energy sector, connecting audiences across Indonesia and beyond. Following our milestones in Phase 1, October 2025 marks our exciting new chapter. In Phase 2, the project
Baik, selamat pagi, Bapak Yose Rizal. Selamat pagi, Bapak Ibu. Mohon izin untuk membuka acara terlebih dahulu.
Selamat pagi.
Lagi, Pak. Baik, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, dan salam kebajikan. Yang terhormat, PLT Kepala Pusat Pengembangan Sumber Daya Manusia Ketenagalistrikan, Energi Baru, Terbarukan dan Konservasi Energi atau PPSDM KIPTKE, Bapak Insinyur Yose Rizal MSI. Yang kami hormati, Koordinator Penyelenggaraan dan Sarana Prasarana Pengembangan SDM PPSDM KIPTKE, Ibu Elin Lindiasari STMBA. Yang kami hormati, para manajemen dari PPSDM KIPTKE, serta yang kami hormati narasumber webinar pada pagi hari ini, Chris Briggs, Program Lead for Energy Futures dari Institute for Sustainable Futures, University of Technology Sydney, dan juga yang kami hormati Samantha Christie, Manager in Strategic Planning, Australian Energy Market Operator. Yang kami hormati, moderator yang akan memandu diskusi pada pagi hari ini, Bapak Dr. David Fernando Silalahi, STMN, PhD, Inspektur Ketenagalistrikan Ahli Muda dari Direktorat Jenderal Ketenagalistrikan Kementerian ESDM. Selamat pagi, Sobat Energi yang berbahagia. Selamat datang di webinar kami dengan judul From Rooftop to Utility Scale, Integrasi Solar, Wind, dan Battery Storage dalam Transisi Energi. Senang sekali saya Dewi Mustika diberikan kesempatan mendampingi Sobat Energi sebagai MC dalam webinar pada pagi hari ini. Webinar hari ini merupakan kerjasama antara Badan Pengembangan Sumber Daya Manusia atau BPSDM Kementerian ESDM dengan pemerintah Swiss melalui proyek Renewable Energy Skill Development RESD. Baik, Bapak, Ibu, serta Sobat Energi yang kami hormati, untuk memulai acara, mari kita pertama-tama mendengarkan sambutan dari PLT Kepala PPSDM KIPTKE yang sekaligus akan membuka secara resmi webinar kita pada hari ini. Kepada yang terhormat, Bapak Insinyur Yose Rizal MSI, waktu dan layar kami persilahkan, Bapak.
Terima kasih. Suara saya terdengar?
Terdengar, Bapak.
Iya. First of all, please allow me to extend our sincere apologies. This webinar was originally scheduled to be officially opened by the head of BPSDM SDM, Mr. Prohoro. However, due to another official engagement that he is unable to leave, he has assigned me to open this event on his behalf. I will now deliver his welcoming remarks. Sambutan Kepala Badan Pengembangan SDM pada pembukaan webinar PPSDM KIBTKE from rooftop to utility scale, integrasi solar, wind, dan baterai storage dalam transisi energi. Yang terhormat Bapak Chris Brigg, Program Lead for Energy Futures Institute for Sustainable Futures, University of Technology Sydney, selaku narasumber, Ibu Samantha Christie, Manager in Strategic Planning, Australian Energy Market Operator, selaku narasumber, para pejabat di lingkungan Kementerian Energi dan Sumber Daya Mineral, serta para peserta webinar yang saya hormati dan banggakan. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Puji syukur kita panjatkan kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, Tuhan yang Maha Kuasa, karena atas rahmat dan karunia-Nya kita dapat berkumpul pada hari ini, Rabu 11 Maret 2026, dalam keadaan sehat untuk mengikuti webinar dengan tema From Rooftop to Utility Scale, Integrasi Solar, Wind, dan Baterai Storage dalam transisi energi. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, transisi energi saat ini tidak hanya berbicara tentang peningkatan kapasitas energi terbarukan, tetapi juga tentang bagaimana mengintegrasikan berbagai sumber energi tersebut ke dalam sistem kelistrikan secara andal, fleksibel, dan ekonomis. Energi surya dan angin merupakan tulang punggung transisi energi di banyak negara. Namun, karakteristiknya yang intermittent menuntut sistem kelistrikan yang lebih cerdas, yang mampu menyeimbangkan pasokan dan permintaan secara dinamis. Disinilah baterai storage berperan penting sebagai penguat stabilitas sistem, sekaligus memungkinkan integrasi energi terbarukan dalam skala besar. Pengalaman internasional menunjukkan bahwa kombinasi PLTS atap, pembangkit skala utilitas, energi angin, dan sistem penyimpanan energi menjadi fondasi menuju smart grid dan sistem energi rendah karbon. Integrasi infrastruktur ini bukan hanya persoalan teknologi, tetapi juga perencanaan sistem, regulasi pasar listrik, serta kesiapan sumber daya manusia. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, Indonesia memiliki potensi besar untuk memanfaatkan energi surya dan angin, baik pada skala rumah tangga maupun skala sistem. Program PLTS atap terus berkembang, pembangunan pembangkit energi terbarukan skala besar semakin meningkat, dan kebutuhan sistem penyimpanan energi akan semakin krusial seiring meningkatnya penetrasi energi bersih. Namun, keberhasilan integrasi sistem energi ini sangat bergantung kepada kesiapan sumber daya manusia. Kita membutuhkan tenaga kerja yang tidak hanya memahami teknologi pembangkitan, tetapi juga menguasai perencanaan sistem kelistrikan, integrasi jaringan, manajemen fleksibilitas sistem, serta pengoperasian storage. Oleh karena itu, penguatan kompetensi SDM menjadi bagian yang tidak terpisahkan dan strategi transisi energi nasional menuju net zero emission 2060. Para peserta yang berbahagia, melalui webinar ini, PPSDM KIBTKI menghadirkan perspektif internasional dari dua pakar yang memiliki pengalaman luas dalam perencanaan sistem energi dan pengembangan pasar listrik modern. Kami harap webinar ini dapat memperluas pemahaman mengenai integrasi energi terbarukan dalam sistem kelistrikan modern, memberikan wawasan praktik terbaik global dalam pengembangan surya, angin, dan storage, serta menjadi referensi bagi penguatan kapasitas SDM energi Indonesia. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, sebagai lembaga pengembang SDM sektor energi dan sumber daya mineral, Badan Pengembangan Sumber Daya Manusia ESDM berkomitmen untuk terus memperkuat kompetensi tenaga kerja, baik melalui pelatihan, sertifikasi maupun kerjasama internasional. Kami meyakini bahwa integrasi energi terbarukan dari skala atap hingga skala sistem bukan hanya agenda teknologi, tetapi juga agenda pembangunan SDM nasional agar Indonesia mampu menjadi bagian penting dalam ekonomi energi bersih global. Semoga webinar ini menjadi langkah nyata dalam membangun pemahaman, kolaborasi, dan kompetensi menuju sistem energi Indonesia yang lebih bersih, tangguh, dan berkelanjutan. Dengan mengucapkan Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, webinar From Rooftop to Utility Scale, Integrasi Solar, Wind, dan Baterai Storage dalam Transisi Energi, secara resmi kami nyatakan dibuka. Terima
Terima
kasih.
kasih.
Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat mengikuti webinar.
Terima kasih Bapak Yos Rizal atas sambutan dan pembukaan resminya. Mari kita berikan tepuk tangan secara virtual. Baik, kami mempersilakan dengan hormat Bapak Yos Rizal apabila ada agenda lain setelah ini untuk bisa meninggalkan ruang virtual Zoom terlebih dahulu. Dipersilakan, Bapak.
Terima kasih. Mohon izin leave.
Terima kasih Bapak, selamat
Terima kasih
bertugas
Pak Yose.
kembali.
Ya.
Baik, Sobat Energi, pada hari ini tanggal 11 Maret kita akan mengupas tuntas tema yang sangat relevan dengan energi terbarukan dalam webinar berjudul From Rooftop to Utility Scale, Integrasi Solar, Wind, dan Battery Storage dalam Transisi Energi. Webinar ini merupakan ruang bersama bagi kita untuk berbagi pengetahuan dan informasi seputar ketenaga listrikan, energi baru, terbarukan, dan konservasi energi. Dan yang tidak kalah seru, Sobat Energi, panitia sudah menyiapkan kejutan menarik untuk peserta yang aktif selama webinar berlangsung. Jadi mohon dipastikan agar Sobat Energi bisa berpartisipasi secara aktif dengan bertanya dan diskusi terkait topik webinar kita pada siang hari ini. Pertanyaan dapat ditulis melalui kolom chat box yang tersedia di layar Zoom. Kemudian untuk sekedar informasi, paparan narasumber juga akan disampaikan dalam bahasa Inggris dan sudah tersedia penerjemahan secara simultan di ruang Zoom ini. Sobat Energi bisa mengklik ikon globe atau bola dunia yang ada di layar Zoom masing-masing, kemudian bisa memilih bahasa yang diinginkan. Dan izin reminder juga Sobat Energi bahwa nanti di akhir sesi webinar akan ada pengisian link evaluasi. Jadi dimohon Sobat Energi dapat untuk menyaksikan dengan seksama webinar ini hingga selesai dan mengisi formulir evaluasinya untuk mendapatkan sertifikat. Baiklah Sobat Energi, selanjutnya kita akan memasuki sesi inti yang sudah ditunggu-tunggu. Acara berikutnya akan dipandu oleh moderator kita yang luar biasa yang sudah hadir di sini. Ada Bapak Dr. David Fernando Silalahi, STMN PhD. Selamat pagi Pak David.
Pagi Bu Tika.
Baik, mohon izin saya akan membacakan profil singkat beliau terlebih dahulu. Bapak David adalah seorang peneliti energi terbarukan, sekaligus pejabat di Direktorat Jenderal Ketenagalistrikan Kementerian ESDM, yang saat ini beliau menjabat sebagai Subkoordinator Penyiapan Usaha Ketenagalistrikan. Bapak David juga merupakan alumni sarjana teknik dari UGM, kemudian menempuh program magister kolaborasi antara ITB, UGM, dan Karlsruhe Institute of Technology di Jerman. Kemudian beliau juga meraih gelar PhD dari Australian National University dengan fokus riset pada integrasi energi terbarukan 100%. Pak David juga memiliki kontribusi riset yang banyak menyoroti potensi besar di Indonesia dalam mencapai net zero emission, khususnya melalui potensi PLTS terapung dan pump hydro energy storage. Baik, setelah ini Pak David akan membawa kita melalui diskusi menarik seputar integrasi solar, wind, dan baterai storage bersama dua narasumber inspiratif kita pada pagi hari ini yang sudah hadir, Chris Briggs dan Samantha Christie. Mari kita berikan tepuk tangan virtual yang paling meriah untuk Pak David Fernando selaku moderator serta kedua narasumber kita, Chris Briggs dan Samantha Christie.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Tika untuk pengantarnya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi dari Jakarta. Hai Samantha, hai Chris. Um, Hari ini saya akan menjadi moderator pada diskusi kita. Dan tadi sudah disampaikan juga di pembukaan oleh Pak Yose Rizal atau Bu Tika, bahwa webinar ini merupakan bagian dari kolaborasi antara Kementerian SDM dengan proyek Renewable Energy Skill Development Project gitu ya, antara Indonesia dan Swiss. Nah, ini tentunya semangatnya bagaimana menyiapkan manusia-manusia Indonesia gitu ya, sumber daya manusia kita untuk siap menuju transisi energi terbarukan. Nah, kita tahu bersama juga bahwa Indonesia telah menargetkan net zero emission pada 2060 atau lebih cepat gitu ya. Jadi untuk menuju ke sana, integrasi energi terbarukan yang nanti akan banyak dibicarakan oleh Samantha akan sangat relevan untuk diskusi kita gitu ya, dan juga bagaimana penyiapan sumber daya manusianya yang akan banyak diulas oleh Dr. Chris gitu ya. Nah, jadi hari ini kita akan banyak berdiskusi atau mendapat pengalaman Australia gitu ya, bagaimana mengintegrasikan rooftop solar atau PLTS atap, kemudian baterai yang ada di konsumen gitu ya, baterai rumah tangga, juga pembangkit energi terbarukannya. Dalam hal ini tentu di Australia kita tahu mereka sangat banyak menggunakan surya dan angin gitu ya, dan bagaimana mereka manfaatkan baterai dan juga pump hydro storage gitu ya. Jadi harapannya dari diskusi ini, dari sharing knowledge ini, kita bisa mendapatkan hal-hal baru yang bisa kita adopsi untuk Indonesia gitu ya. Jadi izinkan saya untuk memperkenalkan narasumber kita. Jadi narasumber kita yang pertama adalah Ibu Samantha Christie. Beliau adalah Manager in Strategic Planning di The Australian Energy Market Operator AEMO gitu ya. Jadi AEMO ini lembaga yang bertanggung jawab untuk mengoperasikan sistem kelistrikan di Australia, termasuk pasar listriknya gitu ya. Jadi AEMO ini akan menjaga balance antara supply listrik dan demand di konsumen gitu ya, secara real time untuk handal, sehingga kebutuhan listrik di Australia itu bisa terpenuhi dengan keandalan yang tinggi gitu ya. Nah, Samantha akan bercerita ke kita bagaimana Australia itu punya semacam roadmap atau integrated system planning. Kalau di kita itu mirip dengan RUKN, Rencana Umum Ketenagalistrikan Nasional, atau kalau di PLN itu RUPTL gitu ya. Jadi ini yang kira-kira mirip. Jadi di sana ada dokumen perencanaannya bagaimana transisi energi itu dilakukan di Australia gitu ya. Bagaimana penetrasi energi terbarukan itu didorong terus semakin tinggi, termasuk tadi integrasi solar atap dan storage-nya gitu ya. Jadi kita sama-sama sambut Ibu Samantha. Welcome Samantha. So thank you for your willingness to share your knowledge today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me here today.
Yeah.
I am happy to talk through this topic. Can I check that you can hear me and can you see my screen, which is showing a purple PowerPoint?
Bisa, terdengar dengan jelas Ibu Samantha. Baik. Nah, berikutnya saya akan memperkenalkan Dr. Chris Briggs. Beliau adalah program lead dari Energy Futures University of Technology Sydney gitu ya. Jadi Dr. Chris ini berpengalaman lebih dari 2 dekade dalam kebijakan energi dan iklim. dan tentunya bagaimana pengembangan SDM atau tenaga kerja di sektor energi terbarukan. Jadi hari ini Dr. Chris akan berbagi dengan kita bagaimana aspek-aspek transisi energi itu perlu didukung oleh kesiapan tenaga kerja dan tentu ekosistem industri yang diperlukan bagaimana untuk mencapai net zero emission dengan pengembangan teknologi surya, angin, dan storage, baik dalam skala kecil maupun skala besar gitu ya. Mari kita sambut Dr. Chris. Welcome, Dr. Chris. Thank you for participating.
Hi, thank you for having me. Looking forward to the session and the discussion.
Baik, Bapak Ibu sekalian, kita akan memasuki sesi pemaparan. Jadi pemaparan pertama akan dimulai dari Ibu Samantha, nanti dilanjutkan oleh Dr. Chris. Namun apabila Bapak Ibu punya pertanyaan atau komentar, silakan disampaikan melalui fitur QA pada ini ya, pada Zoom kita hari ini, sehingga nanti dari panitia bisa mengumpulkan dan memilih mana pertanyaan yang relevan gitu ya. Baik. Jadi kita akan mulai. To kick us off, I'd like to invite Samantha Christie to deliver her presentation. Yes.
Wonderful.
So
Thank you.
Samantha, the floor is all yours. Go ahead. You will have 25 minutes. Please.
Terima kasih banyak. Thank you very much for having me. I will begin by mentioning that I am here in Australia on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, sea and waters across Australia and pay my respects to elders past and present. As Dr. Silalahi mentioned, AEMO is responsible for matching the supply and demand balance of electricity on the east coast of Australia, and we also have responsibilities on the west coast of Australia. As you can see in our slide here, we are a member-based not-for-profit organisation, and we are an independent technical body that is responsible for the energy market and system operation. We also operate some retail and wholesale gas markets across southeastern Australia and in Victoria, which is in the south. Similar to the topic that is being shared today with you all about Indonesia's progression through the energy transition, we too in Australia are on a transition. As you can see in this slide, we have been increasing our percentage of renewable energy in our system on the east coast of Australia for several years now. You can see here on the chart the maximum instantaneous renewable energy penetration in our system as a percentage. It has been growing very steadily. What we have not shown here is that, in fact, we are now increasing even more, beyond 80%, beyond 85% at certain times. We really do have a lot of renewable energy on the eastern coast in our electricity system at an instantaneous point in time. However, we don't have it all the time, and that becomes the challenge for how we plan our system to be secure and reliable whenever we need the energy. This is some history on how Australia came to be having a 2-yearly blueprint or plan for how we will go from here to having our energy transition complete. Back in 2018, we completed a review. This man here completed a review called the Finkel Review. They required that after this review, the Australian energy market operator would work with and be supported by transmission network service providers and other stakeholders in the energy sector in Australia, and that together we would make an integrated grid plan to facilitate the efficient development and connection of renewable energy zones in our national electricity market. This has been, since 2018, the plan for how Australia on the East Coast will integrate renewable energy into our system at increasingly very high penetration levels. First of all, we began by saying, what is a renewable energy zone? We decided that a renewable energy zone in the Australian context would be an area where big groups and clusters of very large-scale renewable energy could be developed and could be economically developed at scale. so that we could transport the bulk new electricity from these zones through to the different big load centres, which are mostly around the capital cities and the main cities. But it was not as simple as saying we will have renewable energy zones and then we will be finished. We had to start from scratch. We didn't have anything to begin from because we have traditionally been using power from coal plants and from gas plants as our primary source. As this transition happened, we realized we needed to begin fresh and begin again. What happened is after that review came out, we held a lot of in-person workshops, and we had them all the way down the east coast of Australia, and we met with energy sector professionals and experts who could help us to plan where could these renewable energy zones be located. As you can see in the images here, we held in-person meetings with big maps where we could draw on the maps and say, well, we could have a zone here, and then we could transport all the renewable energy, the wind and the solar, through to this load centre, and then we talked about which one would be better. You can also see that there are numbers marked on the map where we could talk about roughly the amount of renewable energy that we could get from each area and how much would need to be transferred through the power system back to the main centres, so back to Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. These are the names of the big load centres that we were trying to supply with the new energy. In order to help us make this decision about where these renewable energy zones could be planted, we had expert advice on where is the best renewable energy resource in Australia. As you can see, we have a good amount of wind supply indicated by green colours and above. I'm sorry, I need to move my screen a little bit. On the most left-hand chart, you can see that we have very good wind speeds that are optimal across the state, across the country, and a lot looking good on the inland and more towards around the edges. In terms of solar capability and the ability to have renewable energy from the sun, you can see in the middle image that we have excellent, abundant solar energy, particularly on the inland. And then finally, on the right-hand side, you can see that we have pumped hydro sites as well. So opportunities for where we could use pumped hydro as a renewable energy resource. So we had this technical mapping completed to understand the nature of the resource and map it geographically. Then we had more discussions, which I think is a really key part of what I'm trying to explain here, that this plan has been discussed with stakeholders all the way through. It is not a plan that is only from the Australian Energy Market Operator. We work with others and we continually refine and bring in feedback. Finally, we looked at what different pieces of data we would need to decide on the renewable energy zones. So we looked at the resource quality for wind and solar and pumped hydro. We looked at correlation with demand because we realized that if they're too far apart, then we would need more electricity network to connect them. We looked at how many different land owners there were within an area because we would need to negotiate with multiple people to access the land. We looked at road access, the difficulty of accessing the land, the terrain, which is the terrain complexity, how many people were around, the population density, if there are any protected areas that need to be accommodated, and also the electricity network itself and what it was capable of offering in that area. Finally, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm having some trouble with my slides. I will be one moment. Finally, we moved to the detail of putting the renewable energy zones on the map. They are shown as green circles on this map. And then we zoomed in and looked in detail at exactly how we could bring the renewable energy down from the green zone of where the solar and wind and pumped hydro resource was and transport that back to the electricity grid, because this is not usually where we had been providing supply from. And this was a new expansion of the network. And we had various options, which we talked about with the transmission network service providers and then modeled in our power flow model environment in order to simulate how much power could be transferred. Apart from renewable energy zones, in order for us to make our plan, we realized that we would need many more other inputs. And so, gosh, I'm sorry about this slide issue. I will just try and, goodness. We realized that we needed many more things in our plan in order to be able to model appropriately. We needed things like the generator technical and financial settings, and we consulted on those with many stakeholders and received expert advice on how much it would cost to build different types of generators and also different types of storages, such as batteries. We created scenarios. These are different worldviews for what is a feasible world in which we would need to plan the network for. And so there were economic bases for if we would accelerate fast through the transition, medium pace, or a bit of a slower transition. We also did electricity demand projections to understand how much supply we would need to meet. We understood the policy settings. So we do a lot of consultation with our government at the federal level and the jurisdictional state level in order to understand what policies are in place for renewable energy, for energy efficiency, for storages, and in order to bring those into our model and to accommodate them. And finally, we also calculated how much power could flow through the existing network already. And then if we create more network and do augmentations, how much then could flow through in order to move the renewable energy and the other storages and other supply through to the load center. I guess that there's a lot of detail there, and we actually do publish all of this. So it's something that's public on our website, the technical settings for all of the inputs and assumptions before we even begin using our modeling environment in order to make the next plan. This here shows how we prepare the different elements of our plan in order to make it something which we are all comfortable with, or as many people are comfortable with as possible, so that we can set it and then keep on doing the plan. And this is something actually that I haven't mentioned. We do this plan every 2 years. So the very first time we created the plan was in 2018. Every 2 years we do an update because things are changing so much in this electricity sector and in this energy transition that we realize we need to keep updated. And several important things have changed over time. For example, we now have much more projection of data center load and electrolyzer load, which is now incorporated in what needs to be met. We now have the updated costs of not only utility scale solar and batteries, but also small scale at household level. And we have changed those forecasts at the household level for rooftop PV and batteries, so that as we see more and more people taking up these technologies, we bring them into the model and we make sure that we plan the network in awareness of those uptake levels. What is shown here is that we must take our laws and rules and regulations, and we must make sure that the system we plan is secure and reliable. We must also take all the agreed government policies and targets, and then we take the inputs and assumptions that I've already talked through, and we consult on them and confirm them with the electricity sector before we begin the modelling. Then we begin what we call the Integrated System Plan's detailed modelling process. And the detailed modelling process is undertaken here using a variety of software capabilities. We use market modelling software, and we use power system load flow analysis in order to make a plan which is robust. We come up with the different options for the plan, and then finally we come up with what we call the optimal development path. And what we consider as a result of our modelling is that for Australia, a mix of generation, storage and network investments that can meet consumer needs at least cost all the way to 2050 as coal retires and while we meet government policies. For us, that means renewable energy connected by transmission and distribution, firmed with storage and backed up by gas. And when we say renewable energy, we mean not only utility scale, but also at the household and business level. This is the check that we did in our most recent plan. And as I mentioned, we still see renewable energy as the least cost way to supply electricity to consumers through to 2050 as coal plant retires and while we're meeting our government policies. For Australia, the coal retirement is a big important part of that plan because we have so much coal that has historically supplied our electricity. You can see here that in the grey box, you can see the history. You can see that our coal plants are already retiring. And then you can see that our electricity plan suggests that over time, they will continue to retire and we will reach a point by 2050 when they have exited our system. We actually see 2/3 of the fleet of coal retiring by 2035. And we do see that by the time they begin to retire, they need to operate more flexibly. Now, this change and this retirement is the coal exiting as we see more and more renewable energy entering. So as you can see in the historical section, already we are seeing much more renewable energy. The yellow is solar, the green is wind, and the blue is utility scale storage. In our model, we can see not only does this trend continue, it gets faster, and we can see that by the time we reach 2050, we will be targeting a very high penetration of renewable energy of solar and wind. An important point is that a very large amount of the renewable energy actually comes from people's rooftops and from businesses. The utility scale solar is not the majority by the end of the period. The majority is coming from people's households and people's businesses. In addition, you can see down here, the grey and the purple is actually our projection for how much of our supply will come from household and business batteries. The utility scale batteries are shown in blue, but the householders are the purple and the grey, and they are a significant portion. Now, in order to make sure that all of these elements work together, a very big part of our plan is actually to plan for electricity transmission project developments. So at the moment in our latest plan, we released the draft in December last year. We see that there are 11 electricity transmission projects which need to progress urgently in order to facilitate more access for renewable energy, batteries, storage, and some gas. In addition, as I mentioned before, all of this plan, this transmission network and the wind and the solar are all supported and are all coming in as part of meeting not only electricity demand, but also they are being partly supplied by rooftop solar. These are our projections for rooftop solar, and also distributed batteries in people's households and businesses. These are our projections. These are taken as fixed inputs. We have modeled these projections, and this is where we think the amount of rooftop solar and batteries will go in Australia on the eastern side of the coast. And over time, we see them increasing significantly. And in our model, we assume that they come in, and then we optimize the delivery of the utility scale network and generation and storage around these forecasts. So in fact, by the end of our period of forecasting, we rely a lot for energy supply to be met by households and by businesses. In addition to utility scale, we see them working together. In our ISP, in our integrated system plan, we actually do also take a look at the value of these consumer energy resources, the solar and the batteries. And we see that overall, if they are taken up and if they are supported by the lower voltage distribution network, then in fact, they overall reduce the system costs for all consumers, because if the household batteries and the household rooftop solar are meeting supply at the local level, then there is less need for utility scale investment in the network and in the generation and storage at the utility scale and large scale. One final thing that I would like to show is that the very important part that I mentioned earlier is that, yes, we have very high penetration already of renewable energy from wind and solar. However, what we also need is we need the storage, which I'm sure you're all aware and planning for, which is able to take and store that electricity and provide it when it's needed in the evening and when there is a wind and solar is not available as a resource. So a big part of our plan is also to project the amount and different type of storages that are needed in order to move power intraday, in between the day and within the day, also between seasons, and to cover droughts for renewable supply. As you can see in this diagram, anything which is grey or purple is actually a small battery, which is in a household or a business. The blue ones here are the utility scale and the large ones. And so in fact, as you can see, we are going to be relying a lot on the household and business supply for storage, in addition to the utility scale. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that this has been the material that you might be interested in, but I'm also very happy to take questions at the end if it's not, and if there are other topics that I can cover that are of use.
Baik, terima kasih Ibu Samantha. Jadi itu Bapak Ibu pemaparan dari Ibu Samantha. Ya, tadi Ibu Samantha banyak bercerita bagaimana transisi energi di Australia itu dirumuskan dalam bentuk integrated grid plan, ya. Ya. Dan juga mereka mengidentifikasi di mana lokasi dari sumber-sumber energi terbarukannya dalam bentuk renewable energy zone gitu ya. Kemudian ada diskusi publik atau expert gitu ya untuk men-challenge plan tadi, dan pada akhirnya dijadikan roadmap nasional gitu ya, integrated system plan gitu ya. Baik, terima kasih Ibu Samantha. Sekarang kita akan melanjutkan pada pembicara kedua. Pembicara kedua adalah Dr. Chris Briggs dari University Teknologi Sydney. Ya, beliau akan membahas bagaimana penyiapan tenaga kerja gitu ya, yang terkait dengan transisi energi. Baik, kita akan mulai. Ya, silakan Dr. Chris. Yeah, so you will have 25 minutes too.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are you seeing that okay?
Okay, looks good.
Yep, great. Hold on, my slides are also playing up. All right, there we go. Yeah, like Samantha, I would like to start. I'm also presenting from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and would like to start by paying respects to elders past, present and future. A little bit of background. I'm from an organisation called the Institute for Sustainable Futures, which is a research institute based at University of Technology. It has a wide range of disciplines in sustainability, around 120 staff, and I lead the energy group within that group. Today I'm talking primarily about, it's the same thing with the slides. Hopefully this doesn't persist. So yes, today I'm talking about the workforce, and I guess just a little bit of background is that we've got an extensive background in doing workforce modelling and projections across global, country and regions. There's a few reports flashing up there. We've also done quite a lot of work on the policy and skill strategies for developing a workforce. And I'm going to draw upon some of this work in talking today. And we also have done a reasonable amount of work in Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, particularly a colleague of mine, Samantha Sharp, who I think might be on the webinar here, looking at green jobs and just transition. So today I'm going to share, I guess, some of the learnings and insights from this large body of work that we've done looking at workforce transitions. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background. I was asked to talk about the types of jobs and skills required, so I'm going to share some of the projections that we've done, then talk a bit about experiences in both the large-scale renewables and in the rooftop solar and consumer energy resources. As Samantha has explained, both are really important in the Australian context, and there's both learnings and different dynamics to think about in terms of the workforce required to make this energy transition happen. So the way we look at it, there's actually 5 big movements. One is building the workforce for the rapid build out of large-scale generation, transmission and storage. Second is the workforce then really at the residential and the business level, rooftop solar, batteries and so on. There's 3 other big movements which I'm not going to talk about today, but I like to mention them, I guess, because it brings in a perspective how big this transition is from a workforce perspective. Like Indonesia, Australia has a significant fossil fuel workforce that's going to go through a decline and transition. There is the demand side, so energy efficiency management through businesses in particular, which is probably the largest workforce, but it's so fragmented and scattered that it's hard to measure. And then there is the workforce we need to build through the supply chains for clean tech manufacturing to make this happen. I think it's important to note there is both an efficiency and supply dimension to this, building out the workforce, but there's also a really important social and equity dimension. How this is done could have big impacts on social disadvantage across regions and different parts of the population. And so we emphasize both the way we talk about this. Just quickly, I'm very mindful that Indonesia has quite a different energy system from Australia, where, as I understand it, you have a single state-owned utility and buyer. Australia has an unbundled system with separation of generation networks and retailers, and a lot more private sector involvement involved in that. I think most of what I'm talking about is translatable, but I am certainly mindful, and I can see some comments from the last presentation highlighting differences. So I'm interested to hear what might apply and not apply. So starting off then with projections on how many and the types of jobs. One of the things we do, as I say, is modelling. We've done original industry surveys to collect data on the labour intensity of all these different technologies. So we look at how many jobs per megawatt, and we look at how productivity changes that over time. And then to try to integrate workforce planning with electricity planning, we've done several versions of workforce modelling for the integrated system plan for IEMO that Samantha was talking about, based on 3 core scenarios: the progressive change, the step change is the core scenario, and green energy exports is a more accelerated and larger scale plan. These are the 3 sets of job projections over the next 25 years. The numbers themselves, I guess, probably don't really mean too much. I guess the key point to make here is firstly to note how variable they are by scenario. So there's a lot of uncertainty for workforce planners as to how many jobs are going to be required depending on which scenario eventuates. In all of them, we see a fairly rapid, though, growth in the next few years, depending on how quick the uptake is. You can see the growth could be as much as 2.5 times in a matter of years relative to what it is now. But it's also very volatile with a lot of ups and downs. And that's one of the key features to keep in mind when thinking about how we're going to build a renewable energy workforce. Most of the jobs growth in our national electricity market will be, of course, in renewables. So the green line, you can see the purple line is storage. So also growth there, but on a much smaller scale. Most of the growth is in generation. And the blue line then shows you transmission employment. So you can see an early growth as we associated with building out the transmission lines to the renewable energy zones, and then it really sort of flat lines into a much smaller workforce. And the black line shows the gradual decline in coal and gas employment. Within renewables, the wind farms we see are projected to be the largest source of jobs in all of these scenarios, around a third. So that's the green wedges up the top. But underlying, I guess, what Samantha said as well, the distributed solar and battery workforce is also really large, and together could even be larger than the wind farm. So it's in fact almost close to half. And so there you're looking at the lighter orange and the purple in the distributed batteries. Solar farms are a smaller volume of employment, and there's real opportunity there for automation. So it might even overstate how many jobs there are in that sphere. One important point, I think, also is that we see over time the jobs moving from construction to operations and maintenance. I think a lot of people talk about how there's not really many jobs left after renewable energy projects are built, and that is certainly true on an individual project basis, but cumulatively they start to add up. So in the earlier years, absolutely, it's mostly construction. But by the time you get into what we're projecting in the mid-2030s in Australia, they're mostly ongoing operations and maintenance workforce jobs. And I think that's a really important point to stress, because it's not just a short-term thing. There's a long-term job requirement. Overwhelmingly, the big group are trades and technicians, almost double the next group in our projections. So double professionals, then managers, then labourers, and machine operators and drivers. But trades and technicians are by some margin the key group. I won't go into this in much detail, but I guess just making you aware, we've done detailed occupational breakdowns, and you can see the structure for a wind farm here is quite complicated, but electricians are number one. In the wind farms, technicians and professionals are actually regionally evenly matched, and so you've really got a lot of quite high skilled labour. Solar farms have a much simpler structure. You have electricians, you have a lot of semi-skilled and even unskilled assembly labour, so they're much simpler to build. So that gives you a bit of an overview then of how many jobs and what types of jobs. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and experiences in actually building the workforce for this transition. Happily, Samantha has already explained renewable energy zones to you, so I don't need to do the same. But from an economic and a workforce perspective, they do create challenges for workforce. Some of these renewable energy zones are industrial regions, so they have heavy infrastructure, but the vast majority of where the infrastructure is going to be built are in the inland regions, which are primarily agricultural and resource-based economies. So what that means is that they don't have much energy infrastructure, they don't have much of the pre-existing workforce, and it really needs to be built. They're like new energy regions. And you're really starting from a pretty low base in terms of the existing workforce and training infrastructure. So there's a big challenge and opportunity whether these regions benefit by diversifying their local economy, getting jobs growth, or whether they might end up just having a short-term construction boom and really bearing some of the costs, which are in the form of housing prices and access to services. So it's quite an important, it's I guess a very important dimension to this is the regions. It's actually very challenging to build a workforce for the build out of renewable energy, so it's worth underlying some of those challenges. And in fact, many of the characteristics really are what you might think of classic market failure when it comes to skills and training. It's very hard for companies to invest in training because the demand is volatile and uncertain. They don't know they have a project until they do, and until they get a power purchase agreement, and then they need to build very quickly. There are features of apprenticeships that make it hard for them to invest. So electricians, the duration is much longer than projects, and in Australia they need to do a residential component. They themselves have low capacity for training because they are suffering from shortages. And so even in the current context, there's really quite low connection between the renewable sector training system in Australia and low investment. And the quote on the right is from a recent report, which shows even as this transition is accelerating, few companies are really investing much in training the renewable energy workforce. The boom-bust pattern is another problem, particularly as you can imagine in regional areas where the workforce is smaller. Having really quick ramp-ups and ramp-downs is difficult both to attract a workforce and then to retain it, particularly a construction workforce, which might move on to other jobs. The third feature is that it's quite difficult for the training system because you're trying to build a workforce in areas where training provision might not be that strong. How do you finance training capacity in a thin market, that is where the demand is small and maybe spread out, and there's long lead times to build the core trades for this workforce. And finally, to make things even harder, there's a lot of competition from other sectors for the same workers. So Infrastructure Australia, one of the peak bodies in Australia, is predicting a shortage of 300,000 workers across the infrastructure sector in 2027. And renewable energy finds it hard to attract labour with large transport projects and other projects in urban areas which pay better and don't require you to move out to remote areas which are very hot or very windy. So skill shortages are a reality for the renewable energy transition in Australia and one of the factors that are making things hard. And Australia is, of course, not unique in this, and the International Energy Agency has now highlighted for several years that they see labour and skill shortages happening around the world. So the features I'm talking about here are also found in other contexts. So what are some of the options then for addressing this based on what we've seen in Australia? Firstly, I think a really key point is that workforce development and training needs to be integrated into policy mechanisms, which isn't something that's been very well done in Australia. It's done in other sectors, but not done in the renewable sector. So, for example, on the right, I have an example of a project which sets targets on government infrastructure projects where they must meet skills, training and diversity targets. So they must engage a certain number of apprentices, women, First Nations. And in exchange, they provided industry support officers to help them achieve their targets. And the program has been very successful. That's an example, I guess, of how training and workforce development can be embedded into procurement, which most governments are involved in for renewable energy. So that's, I think, a really important mechanism. Secondly, whatever governments can do to smooth the development pipeline is really important for reasons I've already gone into. And again, most governments have mechanisms through which they can do that when they're running auctions or running tenders. Thirdly, there are a range of things you can do in the training system. I've put a reference on the right because I don't have time to go into it, but in Australia, the Powering Skills Organisation has released a detailed plan as to how they want to try and revamp the training system to address this. So some of the key priorities are improving pathways into the renewable sector. We often hear young people and others say, I can see how I get a job in the mining sector. I have no idea what the pathway into the renewable sector is. So they're trying to fix that through schools. Massively trying to increase apprenticeship enrolments, improve the responsiveness of the training system, and try to improve the diversity of the workforce, because at the moment it draws really from a small part of the population, in particular men, and that's quite hard if you're trying to dramatically increase the size of the workforce. The other point I want to make is regional and local skills training strategies are really important part of this picture, partly because you need to increase the workforce in these regions, partly because it's part of delivering a benefit to these regions, and social license is a real issue where these regions are not always seeing the benefits, and training and employment opportunities are a very important part of that. Again, I have an example on the right there of a strategy that we've did and a link for people who want to look for more details. But there were three things we emphasised with a lot of options. Firstly, on how you build local training capacity. People often think that means a new centre, and sometimes that's it, but they're really expensive to build and slow. And there's a lot of other options you can do quite quickly, like mobile training units, funding private training providers and the like, to more quickly increase capacity. Secondly, we really emphasise measures to increase the local labour supply. Solar farms tend to be short-term employment, which maybe isn't great for a lot of people, but it really creates an opportunity to create jobs for the unemployed and school leavers. The first job is the hardest, and often people go into jobs subsequently. Particularly, we found that for some solar farms and First Nations peoples, and trying to increase the local supply of apprenticeships. And thirdly, talking about how you can build industry partnerships, such as collaborations between wind farms, training providers, to employ the mechanics that are going to maintain the wind turbines. So there's a lot more detail in that study, but obviously I don't have time. So I guess the key learning from the large-scale renewable energy then is there is a really high risk of market failure and skill shortages in generation, which can impact on the cost and pace of energy transition. It needs to be taken really seriously. Secondly, the private sector and market alone are unlikely to train at the scale you need it. So government programs and organisations and integrating them into renewable energy development is really important. Thirdly, I would say you can probably not, it would be hard to overinvest in trades at this point. There is so much demand for them and it takes a long time. And I would recommend scaling up investment as quickly as possible here. And then fourthly, I've really emphasised that it's a regional challenge and you really need local and regional strategies to deal with it. So I'm going to talk now about distributed solar and consumer energy resources. And the dynamics here are quite different. So firstly, Australia has very high solar rooftop coverage, over 4 million roofs and around 1 in 3 households. The industry and workforce structure is simple but fragmented. You have a lot of larger solar retailers and then a lot of subcontractors. You know, most solar farms solar panels in Australia is like 2 people or 3 people turn up to the house with an electrician and a couple of assistants. So it's simple but quite fragmented. In Australia, people often talk about the solar coaster. You can see the graph on the right, the extreme growth in installations and then boom bust cycles. So a lot of businesses went bankrupt on that first bust cycle. Since then, it's actually been very steady. There's a little bit of a decline at the end, but most of those businesses are now doing batteries as well. So it sort of masks what's going on there. And I guess that's the important point, is that the workforce that works in rooftop solar, this is, I guess, from Australian experience, just the first phase. They're also going to move into batteries. They're also going to move into other types of household energy products. And so it's sort of the first step. And we see that now with the battery system, which has very much followed the path of rooftop solar. Extremely rapid and which has outstripped all projections. Every time a new government program is introduced for solar or battery, it almost always outstrips expected demand. And workforce capacity has become a constraint here. They've been accrediting new installers, but they haven't been able to keep up with demand, and so the waiting periods have kept growing. Again, a lesson about integrating supply and training as much as possible before you bring in a program. One thing I think Australia does reasonably well is the accreditation and training model. I spoke about how there's no clear pathway into the large-scale renewables. That's not true for distributed. It's very clear and it works pretty well. You need an electrical license. You do post-trade training in whatever you're doing, such as PV installation. You need to go through assessments to demonstrate competence. There's a national register, and then there are requirements for continuing professional development for the workforce, and it works pretty well. I mean, the dynamics are really quite different here. You don't really have a problem so much of attracting supply because it's quite an attractive opportunity for businesses and workers to work in their local areas. The problem is that demand is quite explosive and we don't always get the supply-demand balance right. but it's a different type of problem. As I mentioned, we're now seeing this workforce move into other areas. There's a paper there on the right where we've done some modelling looking at the workforce demand for residential electrification. So here we're talking about heat pump hot water systems, air conditioning, other things, batteries and other things in people's homes. Overwhelmingly three key trades here: electricians, plumbers, and air conditioning technicians. We've also done work to look at the EV charging workforce. Unlike large scale, most of the labour requirement is in operations and maintenance, not in the construction. And again, it's electricians supported by some other professionals. Electricians pop up over and over again, of course, in this story. And we're also now doing in Australia some early pilots on the installation of home energy management systems. So these are designed to be like the brain inside the house that will coordinate solar, batteries, and other devices as to when they should send power into the grid, or when they should store power in a battery or power your hot water system. So a really important piece of how we coordinate all this huge amount of generation that's being installed in people's homes. But I've also found some real workforce challenges, because what it means is that an electrician also needs to have IT skill sets to be able to connect all these different devices up and the apps and so forth. And so finding that there's going to be an interesting cross-disciplinary challenge here. So I guess some of the lessons: consumer uptake and labour demand is very sensitive to government programs. It shoots up and it goes down, and it's very important to integrate into programs to try and make sure that the workforce supply is there. Labour supply, as I say, has not really been an issue. It's an attractive opportunity. And the important thing on the other side then is to have accreditation systems that can cope with rapid demand and can cope with the influx of supply that's going to happen when that materializes. It's quite a flexible workforce. And we're seeing an interconnection between these businesses and workforces across different streams. And so workforce development training programs need to think about the whole ecosystem. And I think finally, we're seeing that it's going to be more challenging, though, for the wider electrification. There is going to need to be upskilling of the existing workforce, and that's going to require a sophisticated training strategy for how you reskill this really large small business workforce. So, yeah, I guess I'll wrap up there. I guess the key points just to emphasise then is the integration of workforce development in energy and policy and planning, which isn't always the case. The important role for government and public institutions. Thirdly, that the dynamics between large scale and the small scale are quite different and need different training strategies, and that we might be looking at a more challenging training strategy for the next wave of electrification that comes after rooftop solar. So I will stop there, and I think we'll move to questions. Thank you.
Baik. Thank you, Dr. Chris. That was a brilliant presentation. Thank you so much. And please give both Samantha and Chris a big applause. And now, we will move to the Q&A session. So we will have about 40 minutes. Then I think we already have about 20 questions. All right. Probably not all of the questions will be answered, but to open, I will read some questions. So the first question is from this is for Samantha. The question is from Andy, Pak Andi Ramdhani. So based on AIMO experience, what are the biggest technical challenges in maintaining grid frequency and voltage stability when power supply from rooftop solar and wind farm is highly fluctuating? Additionally, how does battery storage contribute to addressing this challenge in real time?
Thank you for the question. I think that one of the most important things is making sure that we analyse and keep an eye on the supporting system services that are needed. So AEMO has produced a number of different reports on the kind of system services that are needed to supplement the variable renewable energy, because those services were traditionally provided by coal and gas. So one that I'm thinking of is providing inertia. This is something which is the ability for the system to very, very quickly, almost instantaneously, convert rotating energy into electrical energy. This is something that was previously provided very quickly by synchronous generators while they were spinning and just very naturally provided. However, now, as you mentioned, we need to supplement it. Traditional frequency support from batteries is actually a bit too slow in order to mimic that response. However, in recent years, we have started to see that more and more batteries are moving closer and closer to being able to provide that quick injection. But it does mean that when we look to connect utility scale batteries into our system, we do appreciate and actually pay for services from batteries that can provide near instantaneous injection in order to respond to a fault. So that's one thing. We have created the connection tests for batteries to make sure that they can do that if they're in an area where we need that. And secondly, we have created, we've actually created a very fast frequency service market in order to provide that service. Another service that is required is called system strength, which is to do with voltage waveform stability. And so we look to support that in two ways. First of all, we test the amount of fault current that is required to inject into the system at certain points. Ordinarily, that would previously have been provided by synchronous machines. Now we calculate that in advance, and we require that the transmission networks provide that. Increasingly, the way they are providing that is either by installing a synchronous condenser, which is basically a motor, which is connected to the system but with no load. And so it is spinning and it provides the fault current injection when required. Or they are planning in the future to be able to use grid-forming batteries in order to provide that injection. At the moment, we do not have batteries in Australia that we are increasingly needing to do test runs and trials so that we are ready to allow batteries to provide that service in the near term. And we actually also publish what we call sort of like an interim or voluntary standard so that people can start to target that kind of quality of service in the way they provide the batteries.
All right, thank you for the answer. I have a following up question that's about, can you tell us more about the passive and coordinated CER? How AIMU, like, do you control each of the battery in the consumer house, for example? Or just, yeah.
Very good question. And actually, that's a very difficult and contentious topic. So we find that in Australia, once someone has bought a battery for their house or their business, they prefer to control their own battery. And so, no, we do not control people's batteries. However, we do have services available in the market that people can sign up for. So if someone chooses with their electricity retailer to sign up for the ability for their battery to be used by the grid in order to provide service when needed. For example, if there's a peak demand event and we don't have enough supply, then perhaps some of the battery providers will have signed up to this arrangement. We call them virtual power plants. It is voluntary, it is not obliged. However, as you say, in our forecast, we actually forecast over time more and more and more of the batteries being coordinated and less of them being passive or not being coordinated. And you're right, that is a big assumption from us, and that is based on our presumption that that will happen over time. However, when we provide the integrated system plan, we actually do say, okay, well, what if no one wanted to be coordinated? What if no one wanted to offer their battery for coordination? If that happened, then what would happen in the system plan? Do we need a different plan? And so we change that setting in the model, we rerun it, and we release results for that actually, which show that if no one wants to coordinate their battery, what it means is that over time, we will need to build more utility scale batteries, and overall the entire system will be more costly for everyone. So the coordination has benefits and we lay those out in our plan, but you're correct, we don't know how much of the coordination will be taken up.
Yeah, so how to make it attractive? I mean, like, why people choose being coordinated or just passive?
Well, I guess so far the presumption is that it would be a financial incentive, so a payment. So if you are willing to offer your battery in order to provide grid support, then you would receive a payment from your retailer. And then the way our electricity market operates is that the retailer who makes the agreement with the household would be able to make what we call a hedging contract over the top of the spot price with the generator. And so it would be done by a financial sort of risk hedging process through our wholesale our national electricity market and the spot pricing.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Samantha. That's another question. What do you think, what's your opinion, how if Indonesia want to replicate the ISP for Indonesia planning for the energy transition? So because you know that Indonesia is archipelago, so it's different with Australia. So what you can suggest for us?
Look, thank you for asking. I don't know that I would be best placed to answer that because I presume that the people working in the energy sector in Indonesia are very much more familiar than me with the issues that you would face in supplying an archipelago. What I can say is that the integrated system plan and the way we produce it actually we publish as much of it as we can and the methodologies in case they are useful. So we are extremely transparent to the degree that our plan might be helpful. We publish a lot of materials, but to be honest, I imagine that in the more remote areas, it may be that quite a different sort of smaller version of the system is required. I would imagine that if you have a system which is solar and batteries and you're starting more from scratch, you may even take it in a direction that is different to the ISP because we have started from a basis of a system that is AC, not DC. And we are now connecting in these DC components, the solar and the wind, and we are needing to compensate for the fact that they don't provide some of the security services that the AC system needs. So I really think it's quite a different design exercise, but the core the core elements of planning for lulls and planning for when there is no wind and no solar, planning for storage that can supplement, and planning for, in some cases, using flexible demand. I guess some of these kind of principles might be useful. I'm sorry not to be more helpful, though.
All right. Yeah, another question. Looking at your slide 16, for 2024, 2025, it seems like the retirement of the coal-fired power plant is not in place. So could you tell us what's going on there? Is there any changing on the plan or the demand is increasing, so you need to keep the power plant on?
Do you mean we still have coal on the system? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so it's not like you have the plan, it's step change, but it seems steady, flat.
Interesting. I'll just put the slide on the screen so we can be talking about the same thing together.
Yes, slide 16, yeah.
Great. So I guess you're saying that in 2024, 2025, yes, the value stays the same for several years. So, yeah. And then we see the first retirement, I guess, in 2028. And you're seeing that because we're basing it on, in some case, there are announced retirements by the coal generator owners. And so, yes, you're right. We've got a year or two before we've got our next big closure. We have had some big closures, but you're right that we've got a year or two before we have another one. And I guess that's kind of a good thing for us because we do rely on the security of coal. And when we see a coal plant exit, we really need to prepare a lot in advance. So we need to plan for making sure we've got other supply which can be quickly brought online. From batteries, from gas, from something which can offer similar services in the evenings when there is no solar. So we have a very detailed planning process that we go through with the generators and with the transmission networks as a retirement is coming up, so that we can be prepared and we can have as much as we need to make sure we still keep the system secure.
Okay. Thank you. Another question. This is from Ibu Ratih Puji Purwaningsi. Given the increasing frequency of renewable supply droughts, where solar and wind output remain low for extended periods, how does AIMU modeling determine the optimal equilibrium between short duration storage and long duration storage like pump hydro? And at what threshold does investing in seasonal storage become more viable than over provisioning transmission infrastructure to link geographically diverse renewable energy zone?
Yes. Can you just remind me the start of that question? Sorry, I got distracted at the end of the question, listening to the end, but what was the start of the question?
Yeah, so how AIMU modeling determine the optimal combination between
yes.
short storage and long storage?
Yes, given the renewable droughts.
Yeah.
Yes. We use some very detailed modeling where we use the market model, which looks at what generators will dispatch at what times. So we have a market model software which mimics our real system and has an object for every different generator. And then when we are wanting to check how we will survive a wind or solar drought, we change the settings in the model so that we are looking at we are looking at the dispatch and demand patterns that we would expect for such an unusual weather projection. And then we run the model and we see how much unserved energy or how much demand is not supplied. And then we test which size of storage and in which location would help solve the problem in the most cost-effective way. So we try a range of options and we look at which one is most cost-effective. And we actually test that option against multiple different weather reference years because we want to be able to plan for not only a wind drought, but also a solar drought. And so we test different options and different weather patterns against the same solution and see which one, check that the solution is workable against different weather patterns. That's actually something that we check for whether or not the ISP is allowed to be released as an optimal development path. We must check that we ensure reliability and security through the renewable droughts.
All right, thank you. I think now we move to Dr. Chris, but probably we'll be back to you, Samantha. For Dr. Chris, you have some question here, but I'd like to ask, the first is from Ibu Eva Nurrahmi. So, renewable energy zones are located in remote areas that previously lacked much energy infrastructure or workforce. How can regional planning be carried out so that this energy development also drives regional economic development?
Yeah, good question. I've mentioned some of the challenges, but I think there are ways in which certainly this is trying to be implemented in Australia that way. So it includes actually integrating local content requirements or industry policies to help local businesses prepare for the arrival of this sector so that more of it can be located and done locally. Secondly, I think a really important part of it is, as I've explained, developing a local workforce strategy so that as many local people as possible can have the skills and can get access to training opportunities. And that often has an ongoing legacy. So the one thing we find people in regional areas are really concerned about is whether there'll be training opportunities for their kids. A lot of young people leave regional areas. So if you can create training opportunities and jobs and skills for young people, then they're more likely to stay in the area. And so that has a lasting, ongoing benefit. I think the third area is that there are also things called community benefit funds in Australia, and these are increasingly getting pulled at a regional level. So these are funds committed by the industry for local community projects. And if they're done on a regional level, then the scale of the funds allows you to invest in more infrastructure and things of lasting benefit. So it's really about having making this a priority and integrating a local regional economic development, workforce and community benefit strategies to try and maximise the local economic benefit. The alternative, the risk is that all you get is a very quick construction boom, and that brings as many costs as benefits. So it's really important that governments, industry and others approach this as an integrated regional economic development challenge.
All right. So in Indonesia, we have Java is a big island, most populated, but the project will be, let's say, in small islands next to Java, let's say Nusa Tenggara. And then if we want to have, let's say, solar farm project there, but it's hard to find local labor. So what's the best approach you suggest for us? Let's say if we need to train or to educate local labor, it's really need like years, but we want to be quick, let's say, because we expect like less than 1 year for the installation. So do you also have same challenge in Australia like this? So for example, you have so many people in Sydney with high skilled labor, but if you want to have project probably for the Northern Australia, you need to move people to North Australia to do the projects. So what's your suggestion how to deal with that situation?
Absolutely. The same problem occurs in Australia. And most renewable companies have a workforce, a core workforce that they will move around between projects. And that's how they operate. And I would imagine the same would be the case in Indonesia in the example you mentioned. There are still opportunities though, because you can train people to work on solar farms with weeks of training. So certainly at the sort of entry level jobs, there's a lot of assembly jobs that can be integrated. So for the unemployed, so there's absolutely opportunities to do that. The other thing I think is to place requirements on solar farms or to negotiate them to take on apprentices. And even if I guess either the apprentice has to move or the apprentice could move between other projects on the island. So how you move people between projects is really important, but there are solutions for that. There are things in Australia called group training organisations. So the apprenticeship is actually engaged by the group training organisation, and then they'll go and work on one solar farm, and then they'll go and work on another project. So there's a bit of a coordination issue or solution. So it is a difficult problem. It's the same. Australia has the same issue, but there are ways if authorities are proactive about designing pre-employment programs and apprenticeship programs to still get some employment and training benefits from these projects.
Another question is from Ibu Yuni Sudarwanto. What are the main barriers to reskilling a fragmented workforce, and how can these barriers be overcome in the next wave of electrification? So probably it's like if you have the coal power plant will be retired, so many workers will be jobless. So they will need reskilling, right? So what's the approach in Australia?
I think, well, I'll address two different types of challenges here. I think I saw the question was about electrification. And so I think I was referring here to subcontractors and electricians that work in houses and plumbers and the other trades. So the challenge here is that you've got a mostly aging workforce that is very busy and doesn't really want to be retrained, is used to installing, say hot water heat pumps as an example. They're used to installing the old gas connected ones, and they end up recommending to the household not to put the more efficient electric one in. So there's a challenge about how you, I guess, retrain them and get them to understand the technology when they don't really want to be retrained often. I think the way around that is you have to have very flexible and very well targeted offerings. So really short courses that really target the information or skill required. Most of the trades have some sort of requirement for continuing professional development, and so you need to embed that into those requirements and make them part of it. Obviously, you can treat the problem at source by then integrating education around hot water heat pumps and other things into the actual trade themselves. But the difficult part is absolutely getting to the existing workforce. With the coal-fired power stations, we have looked at this a little bit in Australia. The workforce breaks down into some quite different groups. There's quite a large contractor base in the Australian workforce, and most of them actually get reassigned quite easily. They go and work for other construction companies or other heavy industry companies, and quite easily. The challenging group are actually the power system operators who have really specific skills and are not as transferable. There's a few things I think you can do. One is a phased decline in the workforce, so you can move this workforce around between power stations as they decline. Early retirement and things like that, if you've got an aging workforce, to manage the decline. And apart from that, it just needs proactive human resource policies that do individual planning with these individuals and try to work out what type of skills and transitions are most viable and where they can be reallocated within regional economies. And that's certainly the most challenging with the power system operators, but it's still possible. It depends a little bit on the local economy, though. In Australia, a lot of these regions are actually very tight labour markets, and so people are really looking for labour. So it's obviously quite different if you've got a high unemployment context, and that is absolutely a major risk of the transition for that group.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. We still have another question. This is also from Pak Andi Ramdhani. Energy transition often raises social concerns, particularly for communities that have long dependency on the fossil fuel industry, such as those in coal mining regions. How has Australia managed the aspect of just transition in this context?
Yeah. I actually responded to that question because Australia, the Net Zero Economic Authority in Australia actually released an energy jobs industry plan today about how to manage this problem. I haven't actually read it yet, but I did put it in the comments so people can have a look. I think there's a few things to go, and I would not say Australia has by any means solved the problem. And in some ways, I think you look to places like Germany that have done really trailblazed on this, and I think Australia's done some things. I think one of the things Australia has done is to increase the notice periods for coal-fired power stations to close down. We had a very bad experience a few years ago where the Hazelwood power station closed down with 4 months' notice, which had major impacts on the electricity system and also meant that you ended up with a third of the workforce still were unemployed years later because you didn't buy the time for a transition. So timing and notice is really important. Other than that, I think you need active, like the Germans have shown, you need active regional economic development policies. You need active labour market redeployment policies to create alternative industries and pathways into those jobs for the workforce. And I wouldn't say that's something that Australia has done so well or so much so far, but it's certainly, I think you can see from Germany that it can be done, and they provide probably more of a model than us.
All right. Thank you. So many questions. It's hard for me to pick which one. Okay. It's more or less the same. And okay, probably back to Samantha. Another question for you. This is in Bahasa actually. So if Indonesia want to accelerate the energy transition, is it better to prioritize the rooftop solar over the utility scale renewable project for the first move? What's your suggestion?
Great question. Yeah. Well, an interesting one. I don't know if I'm going to be able to perfectly answer this one, but some thoughts that I'm having are that for Australia, when the cost efficiency started to come through for the solar panels themselves, the individual modules, that meant we were able to have lower costs for utility scale solar and rooftop solar. So both of those technologies have seen a cost reduction for us. The reason that utility scale solar has been able to do well and flourish in Australia is probably partly because we have had supporting government policies. We have had a number of policies that have supported renewable energy, particularly renewable energy targets, which have been set in the market and which have been followed by retailers and generators. We also have had supporting policies for the firming that is needed for renewables. So I'd say at the utility scale, government policy has made a difference. And then at the household level, government policy has been very impactful there as well, more so before than now. That was sort of to get it started. And then as Dr. Briggs has mentioned, we have now got enough of an ecosystem of workers and employees delivering rooftop and household solar so that it is kind of flourishing on its own. So I guess it's a matter of choosing a priority and then supporting it with government policy. I don't think there's an easy answer because we also struggle with this. We struggle with whether to focus on distributed energy, so the smaller scale, or utility scale, big focus. I guess in Australia, we have decided to progress both, particularly because we have emissions reduction targets that are needing to be met by 2030 and that we've committed to internationally. So we need both in order to progress, and we need the diversity of supply, and we need everyone to be contributing to the transition. So our answer for the east coast of Australia has been both, not one, but there's a few thoughts there.
All right. Following up question. So a lot of government incentives in Australia. So can you tell us more about what kind of incentives still in place, and also which one is the most effective?
Thank you. We're moving into a topic that AEMO usually does not comment on because we are an independent market operator. So we work with the government to understand their policies and then implement them into our model. So I don't think I can comment on which one is most effective. But what I can say is that we have, as you say, a fairly large number of policies. So we have, first of all, at the national level, we have our emissions reduction targets set for 2030 and for net zero by 2050. In addition, we have those settings, those same targets, well, slightly different targets, but still net zero by 2050 and 2030 interim or 2035 interim targets at the state-based level for almost all of the states. So something that has been quite powerful for the energy sector has been the double layer of confirmation, I guess, from the federal and from the state level, because it's meant that we have a number of very strong emissions reduction policies that need to be met, and then consequently decisions have been made for the infrastructure to support meeting them. There is also one other one that I will mention, which is quite impactful right now. It's called a capacity investment scheme. And it's from the federal government, and it is focused on utility scale renewable, but also utility scale storage in order to support the renewables. And it is run as providing tenders, offering tenders for particular generators and storage developers in order to access support from the government in order to firm up the certainty of their project. So it's a particularly impactful one at the moment at the utility scale. And then finally, we have noticed very recently in Australia the very big impact of a recent new federal policy in Australia to support households buying batteries. It began about mid last year in 2025, or a couple of months into maybe in the fourth quarter of 2025. Already we can see huge uptake, increase in uptake for batteries. So I think that one is a subsidy arrangement. So of course, that's been quite impactful, and so that's another one to consider. I guess it just depends which technology you want to focus on.
Yeah. All right. Okay, thank you. Still another question. This is a frequently question actually. What are the most crucial challenges in integrating widely distributed rooftop solar with large-scale wind farm and battery storage? How does AMO address this issue?
Did you say widely distributed rooftop solar and
Yeah.
utility scale wind and storage?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I think that the challenges are similar to if you have utility solar. So the daily profile of the utility solar and the rooftop solar are quite similar, although you're right that the utility solar usually has axis tracking, so they can follow the sun a bit better than the rooftop solar. But effectively what happens is, as everyone on the call is probably aware, we would get a lot of supply in the middle of the day, and then it tapers off and reduces in the evening, just when we need supply most to meet people's evening demand needs. And so part of how we manage that integration is, first of all, we try to have an environment where storages such as batteries and also dispatchable supply such as gas and coal get the correct market signals every half an hour and actually they also bid for meeting every 5 minutes in our market in order to provide the supply in the evening. So financial incentives to support firm supply in the evening or during peak demand when the solar is not available. That's one mechanism. The second mechanism is that we actually have a backstop, what we call a backstop mechanism in some states that has been agreed with governments, where if need be, we have some methods that we can use that allow us to make sure that we take some measures to put extra load on the system when we need to, when there really is a lull in the middle of the day from the solar, because that's the risk, that we can't actually have enough load to sort of keep the system energized. And then finally, I think that something we've had to do is to make our modeling more precise. So in the operational environment, we did not used to really model what would happen with the rooftop solar and the distributed solar in our forecasting approach. We would forecast what would happen at the utility scale, and then we would make some assumptions about what would happen with solar and with the distributed rooftop solar. But now, after many years of working on it, we have created more sophisticated computer models for the rooftop solar and how it will operate across the national electricity market, and that allows us to predict when there will be problems. We did not used to have such granular predictions, but we're getting better and better at predicting what will happen at the rooftop level.
Okay. Another question from Pak Agung. This is probably the final question for you, Samantha. Many energy transition programs focus on expanding renewable capacity, but implementation often faces delays due to institutional coordination and project execution challenges. From your experience, what governance or implementation model has proven most effective?
Thank you. I understand I agree with the question. So often we do hear estimated dates for when transmission network or generation or storage will be delivered, and there can be big delays, and then it's very hard to plan around. One of the approaches that we have taken is in the integrated system plan, we try to present what would happen if there were delays. So we provide the plan for what will happen if people do what they say or expect when they expect it. But then we also, in the integrated system plan, we provide a result from the model which shows what the system would look like if we had big delays due to delivery risk, due to supply chain risk, due to possibly social license issues or issues in delivering the project in the community where the project is located. And so we put a delay in the model on that being delivered, and then we look at the results and we present them publicly, and we provide them publicly as something that can be used by policymakers and by stakeholders in order to inform what they do. It's not actually AEMO's role to deliver the generation or the storage or even, in fact, the transmission network. And so we need to look to governments and we need to look to the developers and the network service providers in order for them to address the delivery issues, but we can provide a coordinated view and a comprehensive view of what will happen if there are delays so that it can kind of drive action. That's the approach that we've taken at AEMO in the integrated system plan, and there are certain things that we need to leave to government and we need to leave to the network providers.
Thank you, Samantha, but quick question. Who will be responsible for the cost? For example, if any delays, then the prediction on the cost will be higher. And is it passed through to the consumers or any subsidy from government?
It's not a subsidy from government necessarily. If there are increased costs, then first of all, the Australian Energy Regulator, which is another separate organisation, will review the costs that are being proposed by the transmission networks. And in some cases, there is another regulatory body depending on which state you're in, but it will undergo a regulatory review process. And if it is deemed as a cost that can be passed through, then yes, it will be passed on to electricity bills for consumers. If it is not, there are some mechanisms where some of these companies are private operators and they need to figure out a way to absorb the cost. But I think that you are broadly correct that the costs in some way will be reflected through to electricity bills. But it really depends on a case-by-case basis because the regulatory regime is very complex. So even the same piece of infrastructure in a different state, so between New South Wales and Victoria or between Victoria and Queensland, it will be regulated differently and it will be passed on differently. So I'm afraid there's too many little details between the different regions in order to stay one blanket statement.
All right. Thank you, Samantha. Actually, many questions for you, but I think that's the final for
exciting.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now back to Chris. So I got an interesting question. So this is about gender equality, actually. So what kind of career you suggest for a woman in renewable energy projects?
Yeah, it's a good point. So a lot of the trades are very male-based, and there's quite low levels of female participation. I'd say the female participation is changing quite a lot in the professional ranks. Sam may or may not agree, but I see quite a lot of women, I guess, now increasingly around the professional jobs in the energy system. But certainly in the trades, there's still a major issue, and it is an active priority for the bodies that oversee training. So they're looking at things like targets to create opportunities in the first place. They're looking at ways in which to change the workplace culture. Obviously, if the workplace is not a friendly, welcoming place for people that aren't middle-aged white men, then that's not going to work very well. So that they're quite conscious of that. It is a genuine priority because how do you scale a workforce rapidly if you're trying to draw it out of a very small segment? So it is something that is being worked on with minimal, to this date, they're implementing policies, but I would say, yeah, there's certainly a lot more women coming into the professional roles, but still working ways to improve the situation in the other and larger employing parts of the energy system.
Okay. Another question. Oh, so many. From Mona Sada. Question for Chris. The ISF-UTS own research report on energy futures in vulnerable communities consistently finds that benefits of rooftop solar are largely enjoyed by middle and upper income households with roofs and access to capital. Meanwhile, poorer households and renters bear the cost of transition without experiencing the benefits. So, how does the ISF-UTS research address this gap? And are the community energy or virtual net metering models widely advocated in Australia truly capable of addressing this structural inequality? Or are they simply creating new layers of complexity?
So I would say firstly, it's more nuanced than that, actually. I don't know that our research has consistently found that. And in fact, rooftop solar is really broadly spread actually through a lot of income groups in Australia. I mean, it's so broad, but it's still true to say that obviously the poorest parts of the community are not well served on rooftop solar, and people who live in apartments or don't own their own house don't get access to it. So I think part of the answer is that we should be running programs through social housing, public housing, and areas like that to do collective models and open up access. And there are some solutions like that. If the person looks further through our research, they'll find, for example, things called research on things called solar gardens, which is specifically about opening up access for people in apartments and lower incomes to that. There is a more, I guess, this debate is raging in Australia right now around pricing, actually, and how you increase the access to it. So it is a tricky problem because the risk is that you end up with a system where if prices are going up, more and more people are going offline or using the grid less, and so you have less energy throughput through the grid and a smaller number of customers funding that, then it's particularly acute with the gas network. I would say it's starting to be debated in the electricity network, but I think it's a particularly acute question in the gas network. I would say these are big problems and people are trying to work out solutions to them. But I think there are certainly a lot more that we could be doing in terms of programs to broaden access to rooftop solar, to energy efficiency and things like that can make a real difference to people's bills and their household comfort. So I think Australia needs to do a lot more around upgrades and opening up access. And then there are much thornier questions about pricing and how you deal with declining networks.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I think this one also interesting. What is the mitigation plan so far in Australia regarding the workers of the non-renewable energy sectors whenever the sector is retired?
Yeah, I guess we've sort of covered this a little bit previously, and I would say Australia has some measures, but I wouldn't say it has got a comprehensive solution for this. But it's mostly around things that I've mentioned before. So it's making sure there are adequate notice periods so that communities can plan. It's about investing in regional economic development and labour market programs. So there's both the jobs and people have the skills to be able to get to them. I think, as I've mentioned already, Germany's done this. Germany is sort of best practice. Australia is sort of somewhere in the middle. I think, not the worst, but certainly not certainly wouldn't say we've solved it.
Okay. I'm looking.
There's probably a lot more questions for Sam than me. So
Yeah, so many.
You can go back to those if you want. That's fine. I'll put Sam back in the seat.
That's good.
Yeah, Chris, probably this the final question also for you. Hopefully it's still related to you. Has Australia adopted micro-credential or short cycle training programs to quickly prepare workers for renewable energy projects? If so, how effective have this program been in addressing the urgent skill shortages in the sector?
So I would say at the distributed solar level, yes. The courses, the post-trade courses are pretty short and easy to access. As I mentioned, to get accredited as a solar installer, you need to do a unit in battery installation or in rooftop solar installation. I would say those, yes. I would say the large scale, not so much. I mean, it's harder there, I think, because most of the companies themselves will want to do their own training. We haven't really managed to get a solution, I would say, in practice, between the larger scale companies and the training system to do those sort of micro credentials. I would say there's a bit more action in terms of pre-employment training and pre-apprenticeships. But mostly I think the companies themselves will onboard and train people rather than there being micro credential courses that really operate for wind farms and solar farms in Australia.
All right. Thank you, Chris. I think we need to go back to Samantha because this is important question. So this one is from Mayor Lampung. Considering unpredictable climate change, especially in Indonesia, where the weather is uncertain, but tend to have more rainy seasons. Is the use of solar cells for household electricity consumption still effective? What do you think, Samantha?
Thank
Probably
you.
did the same with Australia.
Yeah, it's a interesting question and an interesting thing to plan for. I'm not an expert, but my understanding is that the climate change impacts will be different in different areas. And so from a Australian perspective, we plan for our understanding of the Australian impacts. That comes through in how we do our infrastructure planning for resistance of transmission line towers to local wind, for example, and cyclone impacts. I think that what you're asking is actually not something I've heard of before. My understanding is that solar panels are resilient to wind, to rain. But if you're talking about not having the solar irradiance in the first place, then that to me would indicate that the diversity of supply and storage and length of storage is really important. So that's part of the benefit of what we see in the integrated system plan, which is we don't have only solar, we have wind and we have solar and we have pumped hydro. And then we test for a solar drought and we test for a wind drought. And you're right that we need a diverse mix of supply. So sometimes when we're testing with the solar and wind droughts, we're really leaning on the long duration pumped hydro to have charged up beforehand and be ready to dispatch. I guess that's my main comment, just that thinking about storages, thinking about how long the storage can be, and thinking about multiple generation sources. I actually don't know whether or not Indonesia has many pumped hydro resources available, and that may not be an option. I'm not actually sure. So it's interesting challenge that I'm afraid I don't know the answer to, but I'm glad that it's something that you're thinking about. Not glad, really. I would prefer that we're not in the climate change environment, obviously, but useful to think about probably.
Okay, all right. Thank you for the question. Probably this is the final question, probably for both of you. I'm not sure if the ISP also consider the availability of the labor in the factors, because your presentation, you like saying so many factors like population and then distance and land parcels and everything. And how about the labor? Is it one of the criterion?
Yes and no. So we actually, in two ways, account for the cost and the impact of the labour. So first of all, when we prepare our inputs for transmission, generation and storage costs, those costs are based on recent observed costs. So for example, for the draft 2026 ISP that we released in December last year, we unfortunately had to bring through a much higher cost for almost all infrastructure because of supply chain issues and also because of increased labour costs because of scarcity of labour. So we bring through what the trends that are being observed in labour through the cost estimates and recent costs, and then we use those to apply them in the model to say that it adds cost, basically, in order to access the labour. And then over time, if the labour becomes more available, potentially we will be able to reduce the costs. But then secondly, actually the Institute for Sustainable Futures and AEMO work together, and actually the workforce calculations that we have released in the past with the Integrated System Plan have been produced in partnership with the Institute for Sustainable Futures, as Dr. Briggs has explained. So they are actually prepared and analysed as a result of the ISP outcomes. So we produce the ISP projections for generation, storage, and transmission and other elements, and then the expertise applied by the Institute for Sustainable Futures is to prepare the workforce factors and apply them to the results, and then provide analysis about what is needed and where the gaps are. So it's kind of a partnership arrangement. It's not an input. It's more about analysis on the outputs is how I would express it. But I might pass to Dr. Briggs to see if he agrees with that.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think the logic also was that IMO isn't the one who can actually really address the labour requirements, and so by providing the information to training authorities and industry and others, that IMO putting the information out to the workforce planners to then respond to it. So I think that's probably the only other part to add to it.
All right. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Chris. I think that's the end of our session. Thank you for both of you for such an informative and engaging sessions. So many questions around. Thank you for that. And before closing, I would like to invite a brief closing from Samantha and then from Chris.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated the chance to be here. I'm sorry that some of the Australian context can't be translated directly to the Indonesian context, and we all have our own unique energy transition challenges to solve. Unfortunately, I've really appreciated hearing a bit about the flavour of what's going on in your sector through the questions and through the introduction at the start. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you very much for having me. Happy we make all our work available too if there are others that want to try and do workforce modelling in Indonesia. So we do make both our methodologies and data available. And the data is not obviously entirely transferable. There'd be variations, but happy to talk with anyone further that is interested in doing some workforce planning or associated work. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Chris. Once more, let's give them applause for Samantha and Chris for the generous sharing their time, expertise, and insight for us today. We truly appreciate that. So that's the end of the session for QA. So I hand back to Bu Tika. Silakan, Ibu Tika.
Baik. Terima kasih kami ucapkan kepada narasumber inspiratif kita, Chris Briggs dan Samantha Christie. Thank you, Samantha. And also, terima kasih kepada Bapak David Fernando Silalahi selaku moderator yang sudah memandu jalannya diskusi pada pagi hingga siang hari ini dengan sangat luar biasa. Semoga ilmu, wawasan, dan segala pengetahuan yang telah disampaikan oleh narasumber dapat memperkaya pengetahuan kita semua dalam sektor energi baru dan mampu memotivasi kita untuk terus mendukung transisi energi di Indonesia. Dan berikutnya, kami akan mengumumkan 2 penanya terbaik pada webinar di pagi hingga siang hari ini. Panitia sudah berdiskusi dan menetapkan 2 penanya terbaik. Berikut adalah Bapak Andi Ramdhani dan Ibu Eva Nurrahmi. Selamat kepada Bapak Andi Ramdhani dan Ibu Eva Nurrahmi. Nanti panitia akan menghubungi para pemenang untuk informasi lebih lanjut mengenai hadiah menarik oleh tim RISD. Kami juga ingin mengingatkan para peserta untuk mengisi tautan evaluasi yang sudah dibagikan di kolom chat Zoom serta kolom live channel YouTube ya untuk pemberian e-sertifikat. Serta materi juga sudah disampaikan di kolom chat, baik peserta yang mengikuti webinar di siang hari ini melalui Zoom dan live YouTube dipersilakan untuk dapat mengisi formulir evaluasi untuk digunakan sebagai pemberian e-sertifikat. Kemudian sekali lagi kami ucapkan terima kasih kepada moderator dan narasumber. Tak lupa kami mengucapkan terima kasih sebanyak-banyaknya kepada tim RESD atas kolaborasi yang sangat baik untuk terselenggaranya webinar pada hari ini. Bagi Sobat Energi yang ingin tahu lebih banyak mengenai pelatihan dan sertifikasi terkait sektor ketenagalistrikan, energi baru terbarukan, dan konservasi energi, silakan mengunjungi website ppsdm.kibtke.esdm.go.id dan jangan lupa untuk follow sosial media PPSDM KIBTKE di Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, dan juga Facebook. Sebagai penutup, kami ucapkan terima kasih kepada Sobat Energi yang telah hadir dan antusias dalam mengikuti diskusi pada pagi hingga siang hari ini. Saya mewakili seluruh panitia memohon maaf jika ada kekurangan dalam penyelenggaraan webinar. Dan nantikan webinar lainnya di PPSDM KIBTKE. Sekian dari kami. Izin menutup. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sampai jumpa dan salam energi. Thank you, Samantha and Chris. Terima kasih Pak David. Terima kasih para Sobat Energi.
Perkenalkan, nama saya Kristianus Hindom, asal dari Papua, Kabupaten Pakpak. Saya datang ke sini untuk mengikuti pelatihan PLTS di PPSDM KE BTKE.
Perkenalkan, nama saya Muhammad Arif Bau, berasal dari Provinsi Papua Barat, Kabupaten Pakpak, Distrik Karas, khususnya di Kampung Tuberwasa. Saya di sini mengikuti pelatihan PLTS di PPSDM KE BTKE. Dulu saya berpikir materi PLTS itu sangat rumit. Tetapi setelah mengikuti proses belajar di PPSDM KE BTKE, semuanya terasa mudah. Dan pembimbingnya ramah dan mampu membimbing kita sehingga dapat merawat PLTS dengan mandiri. Terima kasih PPSDM KE BTKE, ilmu didapat, Papua terang, energi baru, jaya, jaya, jaya.
Indonesia is racing towards a brighter future, a future powered by renewable energy. But to reach our targets, we need more than just technology. We need the hands and minds to build it. Every transformation needs champions. The Renewable Energy Skills Development Project, RESD, is a development cooperation between the Indonesian government through the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources and the Swiss government through the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, or SECO. This project also collaborates closely with the Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Technology and the Ministry of Manpower. In this cooperation, we are building the most important capital that will power Indonesia's net zero journey to 2060, the people. In the first phase, we've reached new heights in building the foundation of a renewable energy skills ecosystem. 214 teachers have been trained in collaboration with Switzerland's finest institutions, bringing world-class expertise to Indonesian classrooms. While updated renewable energy curricula is co-developed with industry partners to ensure graduates possess relevant, job-ready skills. 835 competent and qualified engineers and technicians have graduated, ready to plan, install, operate, and maintain solar PV and micro hydropower plants across Indonesia. Spanning the archipelago, RESD-supported education and training centers are already active in 9 provinces. Swiss Universities of Applied Sciences and Swiss Federal University for Vocational Education and Training, as well as industry experts, joined hands with polytechnics and vocational training institutions, transforming lives one student at a time. We are also addressing inclusivity barriers by creating greater awareness of the role of men and women in energy and encouraging women to take on greater roles in the renewable energy industry. Over 100 partnerships with renewable energy companies have been forged, creating pathways from classroom to career, from theory to impact. RenewableEnergy.id, a learning and career platform, delivers up-to-date insights, career opportunities, and promotes gender awareness in the renewable energy sector, connecting audiences across Indonesia and beyond. Following our milestones in Phase 1, October 2025 marks our exciting new chapter. In Phase 2, The project expands its partnerships to a total of 19 polytechnics and vocational training institutions in 14 provinces across Indonesia, focusing on not only solar energy and hydropower, but also battery storage. RESD is expanding its public outreach, delivering hands-on trainings directly to communities, further strengthen collaboration with renewable energy companies, and empowering more women to lead in renewable energy. Because when innovation meets inclusion, everyone thrives. More than a project, RESD is a catalyst. Because every teacher trained multiplies knowledge. Every graduate becomes an agent for change. Every partnership brings Indonesia further in its journey towards net zero emission. Through the collaboration between government institutions, education and training centers, and industry partners, we are contributing to a brighter future of Indonesia, powered by renewable energy.